Should you build your own app using no-code tools, or should you outsource the development? Now, the truth is, not everyone should build their own app, despite the availability of no-code tools. For some people, outsourcing is just a better option. On the flip side, though, paying someone else to build your app can lead to tons of unforeseen problems. I mean, think thousands of dollars going down the drain. So which is right for you and your particular app? Well, this video is going to help you decide. And the information I'm going to share with you comes from having spent nearly the past decade helping people build and launch their own apps using no-code tools. So I have a lot to share when it comes to self-building your app, but maybe surprisingly, considering the focus of our business, I also have some warnings against it. So let's jump right into it. We're going to start with the pros of self-building your app, and then we're going to move on to the cons of self-building your app, and stick around until the end because we're also going to go over some actual examples of apps that some of our own entrepreneurs have built. The first benefit to self-building your app is, not surprisingly, the cost effectiveness of doing it. So we recently published another video about what we do if we only had 3 months to build an app. And I'll drop a link to it in the description below so you can check that out after this video. But in it, we went through some research that showed the average price tag for a basic MVP that is outsourced to a traditional development agency is around $75,000. And that can easily go up to $150,000. And actually, some of our own clients, when they initially came to us, they had gone through the process of getting quotes from traditional development agencies, and their quotes for those base MVPs were very similar to that range. When using no-code tools, though, like the Bubble platform, which is the platform we personally use, that price tag is slashed. Now, keep in mind, you're still building a completely custom application. And so if you want to build any custom product and just a business in general, you are going to have to invest. But as a quick comparison, something that is outsourced to a traditional development agency and costs $75,000 could be outsourced to a no-code app development agency and maybe cost closer to $20,000. So there is a big difference. And the cost will, of course, continue to go down from there if you are self-building your app entirely and completely foregoing outsourcing. I mean, depending on the type of training or coaching that you want to get as you self-build your app, I mean, you could spend a quarter of that and end up on the other side with an app that could have cost you $100,000 to outsource to a traditional development agency. So it's pretty mind-blowing, the difference you'll see. Beyond just the cost effectiveness, though, the second really big benefit to self-building your app is the control and ownership doing so will give you. Now, I want to start this out by saying something really, really important that you have to keep in mind if you're considering self-building your app. The cost savings alone are not what should determine whether you build your app yourself or outsource. So again, the price alone should not be the determining factor for you. Because look, the reality is I have seen plenty of people who really do not want to be spending time building their own apps. They do so anyways just because of the cost savings, but because they really don't want to be doing so, they just hate every step of the process. And honestly, that is not a situation that leads to a very high likelihood of success. So that's when you really have to consider whether that ownership and control that comes along with self-building your app, you have to decide whether that is a big priority for you. You know, our own private clients, they come into this obviously benefiting from the cost effectiveness of self-building their apps, but they come into it really prioritizing the control that self-building gives them. They want to be in the driver's seat so that they can have control over decision-making, control over everything that comes with building and launching their app and their business as a whole. You know, let's face it, when you outsource the development of your app, it means hoping that you can convey your vision correctly to someone else. It means playing the manager role the whole time, going through lots of revisions. And those things are outside of hoping you can find a team with the right skill set, the reliability, the availability, and more. And of course, once you start outsourcing, you have to keep outsourcing forever. Anytime you want to make even the tiniest of changes with your app, you have to get on someone else's schedule to do so. I mean, imagine your users running into issues on your app, but you can't fix the issues until your development agency can get to it. And meanwhile, your hands are tied. So long-term, having that control that comes from self-building your app, it means that you are not handcuffed to other people. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to be the sole developer of your app forever. It just means that you can reduce your reliance on external parties. And because of that, you can lessen the amount of emergency situations you end up running into. Hey, real quick, if you're finding this useful so far, then I have a free extended training that I want you to bookmark and head to next. It's over at coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop. And in this free extended training, you're actually going to start taking the individual steps necessary to go from idea to app. This is including things like scoping your app, learning correct development methodology, actually starting to use no-code tools like the Bubble platform. You're going to see what other non-tech founders are building as their first apps. So head to coachingnocodeapps.com/workshop and head there after this video. All right, let's move on to the third big benefit of self-building your app, and that is flexibility and iteration. So when you have control over your app that comes from self-building it, it means that you can make fast iterations with complete flexibility. So if you want to test something on Monday and make changes on a Wednesday, you can do that. If you want to get feedback from users and immediately make changes, you can do that. If you're finding that users are running into bugs, you can fix them right away. You are limited to doing those things when you outsource, but when you self-build your app, you have complete freedom, really. And this can be absolutely invaluable when you are in your very early startup stages with your app and you're getting feedback from users and you want to iterate really quickly so that you can keep your existing user base and continue to grow that user base. Or let's say you are building an app for your own internal business use. Being able to make quick iterations means having the exact custom software that you need in your business all the time without ever having to compromise. So to kind of give you a visual of these pros and cons, I am over on the landing page for our private client program. It's called Built to Scale, and it's where we take founders from their idea stage to launching their pilot app. And it gives you a good idea of how to kind of compare self-building your app versus outsourcing to an agency. Now, keep in mind when people go through this program with us, where we are working personally with them the entire way, it's obviously a lot different than completely DIYing the development and not having any training or support, but it still does give you a good idea of some of these pros and cons. So working with us is going to be more cost effective than outsourcing to an agency. Now, like I said, if you are wanting to really build a completely custom, scalable product that you are turning into a business or using within your business, you still need to make an investment to properly do that. But we're not talking about that $20,000 with the no-code agencies or the $150,000 with the traditional development agencies. And no matter how you self-build your app, it is going to be more cost-effective. The speed is another thing. Now, we talked about the ability to make quick iterations, but we haven't talked about the overall development timeframe, which is still important. Now, when you outsource to an agency, obviously there's going to be a lot of variation because there are lots of different teams out there, but you can generally expect that to be faster than self-building your app, even, for example, for the folks who go through our program. Now, the reason for that is because we take time to develop their skill sets as well. And if you're self-building the app, no matter how you end up doing it, you are going to have to do the same. Now, depending on the type of help you get while self-building, obviously that time frame is going to be different for you, but you're not going to be able to launch your app as quickly as an agency would, which is understandable. Now, what about the app quality though? Because this is another important thing to consider. Now, for the clients who we work with, because we take the time to help them build their skill sets and help them build their apps and make sure they're doing it correctly, the app quality is actually going to be pretty on par with outsourcing, assuming you're outsourcing to an agency that has a good skill set and builds quality apps. Now, this can obviously vary. If you self-build your app and you just kind of figure things out as you go and you don't follow correct development techniques and you end up running into lots of issues and errors, I mean, you may not end up building a well-performing and scalable app. You probably won't. You do need to invest time into doing this in order to have an app that is of the quality level comparable to outsourcing. Now, looking at client control. So in other words, just the control that you have over your app, which we have talked about already. But when you outsource, I mean, that control, it obviously is going to go way, way down because you can't go in there and make changes and adjustments and iterations and any of that, right? So when you self-build your app, your control goes through the roof. And that is, again, one of the biggest priorities, at least the people who we work with have when they're coming into something like this. And so, with one-on-one access, that is only related to working directly with us, obviously. And then with the long-term results, that, it's hard to compare because there are so many different situations that could happen. But generally, if you're self-building your app, your long-term results are able to be a lot higher simply because you have control. And, I mentioned before that being in control doesn't mean you have to be the sole developer forever, but it does mean that if and when you do choose to hire, for example, which, that's the path some of our founders take. They don't want to be in the driver's seat forever, but they want to self-build to have that control and the knowledge so that when they do start hiring and building their team and shifting their own focus toward the business side of things, they actually understand what they're hiring for. They can speak the language, they can onboard people, they can even help train people. So really the long-term results kind of spike up from self-building for a lot of different reasons. Okay, so now that we've covered the big benefits of self-building your app using no-code tools, let's jump over to the negatives. So the first real negative of self-building your app is that you are going to have a learning curve. Now, you may have heard the phrase, with great power comes great responsibility, and that could not be more true when it comes to self-building your app. And really, that's because you want that app to be scalable, well-performing, built using correct development practices and methodology. So the fact of the matter is, if you are taking on the challenge of building your own app, you're going to be developing new skill sets along the way. It is a must. In fact, one of the goals we have for our own entrepreneurs we work with is to not just build their first version app, but to develop their skill set as well so that they can have that control that we've talked about throughout this video. So if you want to come out on the other side of this with a truly scalable first version app on your hands, you have to be intentional about building that skill set, and doing so takes time. With our own clients, we take them through a 12-week process to go from idea to pilot app. And while that is obviously a lot shorter than what it would take if they were to just do it completely by themselves, it certainly still doesn't happen overnight. And that brings us to the second con of self-building your app, which is the time investment that's required. I'm going to put this really simply, but if you are not prepared to consistently commit time toward developing your app and your skill set, this is simply not the right option for you. doing those things takes consistent focus and work. It is hard. And that's why not everyone chooses to take on the challenge of building their own app. Now, if you value having that skill set and the control and flexibility that comes along with it, it is going to be worthwhile. Okay, so that one is pretty straightforward. And I have one more negative I want to share with you that I very strongly believe is important for you to be aware of. And then after that, we're going to jump to some of those app examples that I'd mentioned earlier. But the last potential negative, this may or may not be true for you, is the overall enjoyment of the self-building process. So I mentioned earlier that I've seen people decide to self-build their app purely because of the cost effectiveness, but otherwise they really have absolutely no desire to be in the driver's seat, and they end up just not enjoying the process. And it's very hard to be successful when you feel that way because, the theme throughout this video has been consistency, focus, developing the skill set. These things take time. And if you hate doing what you're doing, it's just going to be really hard to stick with it. And so if you just have no desire to be self-building your app, I urge you not to, or to at least have some real talk with yourself. Now, how do you know whether you're going to like it if you've never done it before? Well, first and foremost, you have to understand that app development and business growth in general, but app development specifically, is full of puzzles. It takes constant problem solving. And for some people, this is like a nightmare situation. They just want to be able to do something really quickly and move on and never have to think about that thing again. And that is not the nature of development. It's one big experiment. It's one big puzzle. There's lots of tinkering. You're going to be getting your hands dirty, doing things incorrectly, learning from those mistakes. It's really a process. So if you enjoy problem solving, tinkering, experimenting, that's a good sign. All right, so with all that under your belt, we're going to jump over to a few examples of apps that were built by some of our own clients. Now, to set your expectations correctly, which I think is very important, keep in mind that the apps in their current state that you're going to see when we go through them, they're very evolved and different from what they were in their pilot state, or that MVP, first version state. It's always important to keep that in mind when you are just starting out, but these were self-built by these founders, and they each took slightly different routes afterwards in growing their businesses as a whole, hiring team members to support that growth and support their development. So just like them, remember that you don't have to be in the driver's seat as the sole developer for the lifetime of your app, but self-building the first version through its initial stages can give you a lot of flexibility and control in how you expand it. All right, so first up, we have an app called Reps Tracker, which was built by our client, Kirsten. And it's essentially a tool for real estate investors to make sure they are taking advantage of all the tax benefits available to them. And so her app got a lot of traction very quickly, and she did really well because she started out with a true first version and started getting very quick feedback from users so that she could add on and expand the feature set. So there is time tracking, so you can track time spent, not just for yourself, but also, for example, for your short-term rental team, like your cleaners or your contractors. Your spouse can use this as well. You can upload evidence of time spent so that you can obviously file your taxes correctly. And it's a huge, not only time saver for these real estate investors, but also gives them a very big financial benefit because they can take advantage of those tax incentives available to them. All right, next up, we have an app called Ultimate Book List, which was created by a founder named Corrado. And this app helps connect you with books that celebrities or experts you admire and follow have suggested. So in other words, it's just kind of like a way to look at their reading list so that you can read the books that they've been reading as well. Now, this is kind of like my dream app because I don't know about you, but if I could spend all day, every day just sitting outside and reading, I would. But so I really love the concept of this app, but even more so, I love the delivery of it. So you can browse through these different founders or celebrities, for example, and founders and celebrities, experts really of all sorts, and create your own book list based off of what they're reading. So really cool app in general, but also very impressive execution by Corrado, the founder. Another example I really like to show off is Wash Dry Fold POS, which was created by founder Brian Henderson. Now, I love showing this off because I personally just think Brian is such a smart and driven entrepreneur and a really good example of what you can create over the long run. So he has lots of experience running laundromats. And so the app he developed is a laundromat point of sale system, which essentially helps laundromats operate effectively and efficiently. And I love how Brian has expanded, as you can see here, with a team. So, I mentioned that you don't have to be in the driver's seat as the developer forever. And as you can see here, for example, Brian has a software and support specialist on his team. And so, app functionality aside between these particular examples, the point I really want to drive home is that these founders took control in order to have control over the long run and grow and develop their businesses how they personally wanted to. And that's so important because growing your business in a way that aligns with you is what is going to help you grow a sustainable business over the long run. So those are just a few examples, but gosh, there are just so many founders that are doing such impressive things with their skill sets, with their apps. And so I want to jump over to a different page on our website, which is just a general showcase page showing off these founders and what they've created. And we're not going to go through every app, but I'm going to leave the link to this page in the description below, because if you scroll through, you can see, all these founders have kind of described where they started from or kind of what led them to finding no-code tools and to choose to self-build their own app. And they've also shared demos of the apps that they have personally created. And I think looking through some of these demos, reading these stories can really give you a good idea of what you should plan and prepare for if you are self-building your app, the kinds of expectations you should be setting for yourself, what you can be aiming for, what your options are really. So again, I'll drop a link to this page in the description below. But if you take some time browsing, it should give you even better perspective on whether or not self-building is the right path for you. All right, my friend, I hope this was helpful for you. And if it was, there are going to be some videos on the screen in just a minute. And I think those are going to be helpful for you too as you take your next steps.